The handcuffs clicked shut around 12-year-old Tommy's wrists, with a sound that would haunt Riverside Elementary for months to come. His mother's scream pierced the afternoon air as two uniformed officers dragged her son across the playground, his confusion evident in every stumbling step. "Mama, Mama!" Tommy cried, his distinctive features contorted with terror he couldn't understand. The other children stood frozen, their after-school games forgotten, witnessing an injustice that would forever change their understanding of the world. Just 30 minutes earlier, the schoolyard had been alive with the joyful chaos of children at play. Tommy Rodriguez had been running through his favorite game of tag, his distinctive laugh echoing across the concrete as he chased his classmates with the pure, unfiltered happiness that made him beloved by everyone at Riverside Elementary. His thick-rimmed glasses bounced on his nose, and his tongue protruded slightly in concentration as he navigated around the swing sets and jungle gym. His movements perhaps less coordinated than the other children, but filled with equal enthusiasm. "You're it, Tommy," called out Sarah, a third grader who had become one of his closest friends. She giggled as she darted behind the slide, her pigtails flying. Tommy clapped his hands together in delight, his eyes sparkling with mischief as he began his pursuit. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the playground, and the air carried the scent of autumn leaves and childhood innocence. Mrs. Henderson, the school secretary, watched from the main entrance with a warm smile. She had worked at Riverside for 15 years and had never encountered a child as genuinely kind and loving as Tommy. Despite his Down syndrome, or perhaps because of the pure heart that came with it, he had a gift for bringing out the best in everyone around him. Teachers would often comment on how their worst days were brightened by Tommy's enthusiastic greetings and spontaneous hugs. "Tommy's having such a good time," Mrs. Henderson murmured to herself, checking her watch. His mother, Maria Rodriguez, wouldn't arrive for pickup for another 20 minutes. Maria worked 2 jobs to support her family, and the extended after-school care program had been a blessing, allowing Tommy to play with friends while she finished her shift at the medical office downtown. From across the street, through the carefully manicured garden of her suburban fortress, Karen Whitfield watched the playground with growing irritation. At 45, she had cultivated an image of respectability that masked a deep-seated need to control everything within her sphere of influence. Her perfectly styled blonde hair never moved out of place, and her designer clothes spoke of a woman who had never known real struggle. She had moved to this neighborhood specifically for its reputation, expecting a certain standard that, in her mind, was being increasingly threatened. "Look at that child," she muttered to herself, pressing her face closer to the window. Tommy's enthusiastic shouts and distinctive mannerisms triggered something dark in Karen's consciousness. She had complained to the school board twice about that boy being allowed in mainstream classes, citing concerns about disruption and inappropriate behavior that existed nowhere outside her prejudiced imagination. Karen had spent months building her case in whispered conversations at neighborhood association meetings and PTA gatherings. She spoke in coded language about special needs children and safety concerns, never quite saying what she really meant, but leaving no doubt about her intentions. Her husband, David, a successful attorney who spent more time at the office than at home, had grown weary of her obsessions, but found it easier to nod along than to challenge her increasingly extreme views. As Tommy's laughter grew louder, Karen's patience snapped. She watched him playfully tackle another child in the game of tag, both kids tumbling to the ground in a fit of giggles, and her mind transformed innocent play into something sinister. Her hand reached for her phone with practiced efficiency, her fingers dialing 911 with the confidence of someone who had never questioned her own moral authority. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was calm and professional, trained to handle genuine crises with steady competence. "There's a dangerous individual at Riverside Elementary," Karen said, her voice carefully modulated to convey urgency without betraying her deception. "A large child is attacking other students on the playground. He appears to be mentally unstable and is exhibiting violent, threatening behavior. The other children are terrified, and I fear for their safety." The dispatcher, Janet Morrison, had fielded thousands of emergency calls during her 10-year career. Something about this call felt off, but protocol demanded she take all reports seriously. "Ma'am, can you describe the individual? Are any children injured?" Karen peered through her blinds again, watching Tommy help another child to their feet after they had accidentally fallen during their game. "He's approximately 12 years old, Hispanic, wearing a blue shirt. He's much larger than the other children and appears to have some kind of mental condition. He keeps making strange noises and movements. The situation is escalating rapidly." Every word was calculated, designed to paint Tommy as a threat while avoiding outright lies that could be easily disproven. Karen had learned the art of strategic truth-telling from years of neighborhood disputes and insurance claims, understanding exactly how to present information to achieve her desired outcome. "Officers are being dispatched now. Ma'am, please stay on the line," Janet said, already wondering if this was another case of adult paranoia being projected onto children's normal play. But she couldn't take chances when children's safety was allegedly at stake. Within minutes, 2 squad cars pulled up to the elementary school, their red and blue lights cutting through the golden afternoon light like harbingers of approaching tragedy. Officers Michael Chen and Robert Martinez emerged from their vehicles, their hands instinctively checking their equipment as they approached the playground. Both men were experienced police officers with children of their own, but they had been trained to treat all calls as potentially dangerous until proven otherwise. The children's laughter died instantly as the officers appeared. Tommy, who had been in the middle of counting to 10 for another round of hide-and-seek, looked up with curiosity rather than fear. In his innocent worldview, police officers were helpers, like firefighters and teachers, people who kept everyone safe and happy. "Hi!" Tommy called out enthusiastically, waving at the officers with both hands. His glasses had slipped down his nose, giving him an endearingly disheveled appearance. "Are you here to play too?" Officer Chen felt an immediate unease as he observed the scene. The playground looked exactly like what it was, a normal after-school environment where children were engaged in typical play. There was no sign of distress, no injured parties, no indication of the dangerous situation that had been reported. Tommy's friendly greeting and obvious developmental disability made the whole situation even more perplexing. "Son, we need you to come with us," Officer Martinez said, his training overriding his instincts. The dispatcher had emphasized the urgency of the call, mentioning potential violence and frightened children. He couldn't see evidence of either, but procedure demanded investigation. Tommy's smile faltered slightly, confusion creeping into his features. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked, his voice carrying the genuine bewilderment of a child who had been playing innocently just moments before. "I was just playing tag with my friends." Sarah and the other children began to gather around Tommy protectively, their young faces reflecting confusion and growing alarm. "Tommy didn't do anything bad," Sarah said loudly, her 8-year-old voice carrying the moral clarity that adults often lose. "We were just playing games." Mrs. Henderson had noticed the police cars and was now hurrying across the playground, her sensible shoes clicking rapidly against the pavement. 20 years of working with children had given her an intuitive understanding of situations, and everything about this scene felt wrong. Tommy was one of the gentlest children she had ever known, incapable of the kind of behavior that would warrant police intervention. Officers, I'm Mrs. Henderson, the school secretary. Is there some kind of problem? She asked, positioning herself protectively near Tommy, while maintaining a respectful tone with the police. Her maternal instincts were screaming that this child was in danger, not from any external threat, but from the very people who were supposed to protect him. Ma'am, we received a report of a dangerous individual on the playground, threatening other children. Officer Chen explained, his own doubts growing stronger as he took in the peaceful scene. We need to investigate the situation. Tommy's eyes widened behind his thick glasses. The word dangerous didn't make sense in the context of his afternoon of play. He looked around at his friends, searching their faces for understanding that wouldn't come. I'm not dangerous, he said quietly, his lower lip beginning to tremble. I was just playing tag. Sarah, tell them we were playing tag. We were playing tag, Sarah insisted, her voice rising with indignation. Several other children began to chime in, their voices overlapping as they tried to explain the innocuous nature of their afternoon activities. But their childish protests seemed to carry little weight in the face of official adult concerns. Mrs. Henderson's protective instincts intensified as she watched Tommy's confusion turn to distress. Officers, Tommy has Down syndrome, and he's one of our most beloved students. He's never shown any aggressive behavior. In fact, he's extraordinarily gentle and kind. Whatever report you received, I can assure you it was mistaken. Officer Martinez hesitated, his experience telling him that Mrs. Henderson's assessment was probably accurate. But the dispatcher had been explicit about the urgency of the situation, and his training demanded that he follow protocol. Ma'am, we still need to investigate. The caller reported specific threatening behaviors and mentioned that other children were frightened. Look around you, Mrs. Henderson said, gesturing to the group of children who had formed a protective circle around Tommy. Do any of these children look frightened? They're trying to protect their friend because they know he's done nothing wrong. But procedures and protocols had already been set in motion. Officer Chen, despite his growing certainty that this was a massive misunderstanding, felt compelled to continue the investigation. The weight of departmental policy and the explicit nature of the 911 call left him little room for discretion. Son, we're going to need you to come with us while we sort this out, he said to Tommy, his voice gentler than before, but still carrying official authority. Tommy's confusion transformed into fear as the reality of the situation began to penetrate his understanding. Police officers were supposed to be friendly helpers, but these men seemed serious and stern in ways that frightened him. I want my mama, he whispered, his voice barely audible above the growing murmur of concerned children and arriving school staff. The situation escalated with heartbreaking swiftness. Tommy, overwhelmed by confusion and fear, began to exhibit the self-soothing behaviors that were natural to his condition. He rocked slightly from side to side and made soft humming sounds, coping mechanisms that had helped him navigate stressful situations throughout his life. To trained eyes, these were clearly indicators of anxiety and developmental disability. But to officers operating under the assumption of potential danger, they appeared to confirm the caller's description of strange behaviors. Officer Martinez, misinterpreting Tommy's distress as potential resistance, made the fateful decision to restrain him. Sir, I need you to put your hands behind your back, he commanded, producing handcuffs with practiced efficiency. The metal caught the afternoon sunlight, sending bright flashes across the playground, like warning signals of impending tragedy. No, no handcuffs, Tommy cried, his voice breaking with terror. His developmental disability made it difficult for him to process abstract concepts like legal procedures or investigative protocols. All he understood was that these men wanted to take him away from his friends and his safe space. And that understanding filled him with primal fear. Mrs. Henderson stepped forward with determined courage. "Officers, please. This is a child with a disability who doesn't understand what's happening. Surely we can handle this situation without restraints. His mother will be here in 15 minutes for pickup. Can't we wait?" But momentum and protocol had taken control of the situation. Officer Chen, despite his personal misgivings, found himself assisting his partner in restraining a sobbing 12-year-old boy whose only crime had been playing tag with his friends. The handcuffs were designed for adult wrists, and they looked grotesquely oversized on Tommy's small hands, a visual metaphor for the disproportionate response to his innocent actions. The children's protests grew louder and more desperate as they watched their friend being treated like a criminal. Sarah began to cry, her 8-year-old mind struggling to comprehend how adult authority could be so fundamentally wrong. Other students joined her tears, creating a chorus of childhood anguish that would echo in the memories of everyone present for years to come. "He's not dangerous," they chanted through their tears. "Tommy's our friend. Leave him alone." Their voices carried the pure moral clarity that exists before social conditioning teaches people to defer to authority even when it's clearly wrong. Just as the officers began to escort Tommy toward their squad car, Maria Rodriguez's battered Honda Civic pulled into the school parking lot. She was 15 minutes early, having managed to finish her medical office duties ahead of schedule, and eager to surprise her son with extra playground time. The sight that greeted her was every parent's nightmare, her child in handcuffs, surrounded by police officers, while other children cried and adults looked on in helpless distress. "Tommy!" Maria screamed, abandoning her car with the door still open and running across the parking lot with the desperation of a mother watching her child face mortal danger. "What are you doing to my son? Let him go." Her arrival intensified the chaos. Tommy, seeing his mother, began sobbing harder and calling for her with the heartbreaking desperation of a child who couldn't understand why his world had suddenly become frightening and hostile. "Mama, help me. I didn't do anything bad." Maria reached the group and immediately positioned herself between the officers and her son, her 5'2" frame trembling with protective fury. "I'm his mother, Maria Rodriguez. Tommy has Down syndrome. He's never hurt anyone in his life. What possible reason could you have for handcuffing a disabled child?" Officer Chen, now deeply uncomfortable with the entire situation, attempted to explain. "Ma'am, we received a 911 call reporting dangerous and threatening behavior. We're required to investigate all such reports, especially when children's safety is allegedly at risk." Dangerous behavior. Maria's voice cracked with incredulous anger. "Look at him. He's 12 years old. He weighs 90 pounds, and he has the mental capacity of a 6-year-old. The most dangerous thing he's ever done is accidentally knock over a glass of milk. Who called in this report?" The officers exchanged glances, neither willing to admit they didn't have a clear answer to that question. The anonymous nature of the 911 call had allowed them to proceed without considering the motivations or reliability of the caller, a procedural blind spot that was now glaringly obvious in the face of Maria's anguish. Mrs. Henderson, who had been joined by Principal Janet Walsh and several teachers, stepped forward to provide context. "Officers, I can provide character references for Tommy from every staff member at this school. He's been a student here for 3 years, and he's never shown even the slightest aggressive tendency. This has to be a mistake." Principal Walsh, A woman whose 30 years in education had taught her to identify genuine problems from manufactured ones, added her voice to Tommy's defense. Tommy Rodriguez is one of our most beloved students. He participates in our Peer Buddy program, helps younger children, and has never received so much as a disciplinary warning. Whatever report you received was either based on a misunderstanding or was deliberately false. But the machinery of bureaucracy, once set in motion, proved difficult to stop. The officers, despite their growing certainty that they were dealing with an innocent child, felt bound by protocol and the explicit nature of the emergency call. Tommy remained handcuffed while they radioed for guidance from their supervisor, a delay that stretched minutes into what felt like hours for everyone involved. During this agonizing wait, more parents began arriving for pickup, each one stopping in shock as they processed the scene before them. Word spread quickly through the crowd. Tommy Rodriguez, the sweet boy with Down syndrome who greeted everyone with enthusiastic hugs, was being treated as a criminal suspect based on an anonymous accusation of dangerous behavior. Jennifer Park, whose daughter Claire was in Tommy's class, felt her stomach drop as she witnessed the injustice unfolding. She had seen Tommy and Claire play together countless times, had watched him patiently help her daughter with difficult math problems, had smiled at his infectious laugh during school events. The idea that this gentle child could be considered dangerous was so absurd, it bordered on the surreal. "This is insane," she whispered to another parent, pulling out her phone to document the scene. "Someone needs to be held accountable for this." The growing crowd of parents and staff created a protective circle around Maria and Tommy, their collective moral outrage beginning to influence the officer's perspective. It became increasingly difficult to maintain the fiction that this disabled child represented any kind of threat when surrounded by people who knew him personally and could vouch for his character. Finally, Sergeant Patricia Williams arrived to assess the situation. A 20-year veteran with extensive training in crisis de-escalation and disability issues. She took one look at the scene and immediately understood that a serious error had occurred. Her first action was to direct the officers to remove Tommy's handcuffs, a decision that brought audible sighs of relief from the gathered crowd. "Son, I'm very sorry about this misunderstanding," Sergeant Williams said to Tommy, her voice gentle and reassuring. She knelt down to his eye level, a gesture that acknowledged his humanity in a way the previous interactions had not. "You're not in trouble, and we're going to make sure you get home safely to your mother." Tommy rubbed his wrists, where the handcuffs had left red marks, his tears still flowing, but his terror beginning to subside. "I just wanted to play tag," he whispered, his voice carrying the wounded innocence of a child whose faith in adult fairness had been shattered. Maria gathered her son into her arms, holding him with the fierce protectiveness of a mother who had nearly lost everything that mattered to her. "It's okay, mijo. Mama's here. You're safe now." But even as she comforted him, her mind was already turning toward questions of justice and accountability. Sergeant Williams conducted a thorough investigation of the 911 call, reviewing the recording and tracing its origin. What she discovered confirmed everyone's worst suspicions. The call had come from Karen Whitfield, a woman with no direct connection to the school who had fabricated an emergency based on her observation of normal childhood play. The malicious nature of the false report became clear as Williams compared Karen's dramatic claims with the reality of the situation. The revelation sparked immediate outrage among the parents and staff. Karen Whitfield was known in the neighborhood as a chronic complainer and self-appointed guardian of property values. But this transgression crossed every line of human decency. She had weaponized law enforcement against a disabled child, exploiting systemic biases to target someone she considered undesirable for her community. Dr. Amanda Foster, a child psychologist whose son attended Riverside Elementary, recognized the long-term implications of what had occurred. "This isn't just about one false report," she told the gathering crowd. "This is about a culture that allows vulnerable individuals to be victimized by people who exploit their disabilities for personal gain. Tommy will carry the trauma of this experience for years, and Karen Whitfield needs to face serious consequences for what she's done." Word of the incident spread through social media with viral intensity. Parents shared photos and videos of Tommy being handcuffed, along with testimonials about his character and the injustice of his treatment. The hashtag #JoshJusticeForTommy began trending locally, then nationally, as the story resonated with people who recognized the fundamental wrongness of what had occurred. Local news stations picked up the story, interviewing Maria Rodriguez, school officials, and child advocacy experts about the incident's broader implications. Maria, despite her emotional exhaustion, spoke with powerful clarity about her son's experience. "Tommy doesn't understand why this happened to him. He keeps asking me what he did wrong. And I don't know how to explain that sometimes adults make terrible mistakes that hurt innocent children." The story attracted national attention when disability rights organizations began highlighting it as an example of systemic discrimination against individuals with developmental disabilities. Advocates pointed out that people with Down syndrome and other cognitive disabilities are disproportionately likely to be misunderstood by law enforcement, often with tragic consequences. Karen Whitfield, meanwhile, found herself facing intense scrutiny and universal condemnation. Her identity was revealed through public records of the 911 call, and her history of neighborhood complaints and discriminatory behavior came under examination. Neighbors who had previously tolerated her prejudiced comments now spoke openly about her pattern of targeting families she deemed undesirable. The school district, recognizing the severity of the situation and their responsibility to protect all students, called for a community meeting to address the incident and discuss measures to prevent similar occurrences. The meeting, held in the Riverside Elementary Gymnasium, drew hundreds of parents, community members, and advocacy groups, all united in their demand for justice and systemic change. Principal Walsh opened the meeting with a formal apology to Tommy and his family. "What happened to Tommy Rodriguez was wrong on every level. Our school failed to protect one of our most vulnerable students from adult prejudice and systemic discrimination. We take full responsibility for our role in this injustice, and we commit to doing better." The crowd erupted in applause, but the energy in the room demanded more than apologies. Parents stood one by one to share their experiences with Tommy, painting a picture of a child whose kindness and joy had touched countless lives. Sarah's mother, Jennifer Park, spoke about how Tommy had helped her daughter overcome her fear of making mistakes in math class by celebrating every attempt with enthusiastic encouragement. Mrs. Henderson, fighting back tears, described Tommy's daily ritual of greeting every staff member with personalized good morning messages, remembering details about their families and interests that adults often forgot. "Tommy makes our school a better place every single day. The idea that anyone could see him as threatening shows how prejudice can blind us to basic humanity." The meeting's turning point came when Sergeant Williams presented her findings about Karen Whitfield's 911 call. The systematic nature of Karen's deception became clear as Williams detailed the specific false claims and their potential consequences. Karen had not simply made an error in judgment. She had deliberately crafted a narrative designed to criminalize a disabled child's normal behavior. District Attorney Michael Chen announced that his office would pursue criminal charges against Karen Whitfield for filing a false police report, misuse of emergency services, and harassment of a disabled individual. This was not a mistake or misunderstanding. he told the packed gymnasium. This was a deliberate attempt to weaponize law enforcement against a vulnerable child based on discriminatory motivations. The announcement was met with sustained applause, but community leaders emphasized that legal action alone would not address the systemic issues revealed by Tommy's experience. Dr. Foster proposed a comprehensive response that included mandatory disability awareness training for all school staff and local law enforcement, improved protocols for responding to reports involving individuals with developmental disabilities, and ongoing community education about inclusion and acceptance. Maria Rodriguez, speaking publicly for the first time since the incident, delivered remarks that brought many audience members to tears. Tommy doesn't understand why this happened to him, and maybe that's a blessing. His innocence protects him from the full knowledge of how cruel the world can be. But I understand, and I will not let his suffering be meaningless. We will make sure this never happens to another child. The community's response was swift and comprehensive. A legal defense fund established for Tommy's family raised over $50,000 in the first week, with donations coming from across the country. More importantly, the incident catalyzed lasting changes in how the community approached disability, inclusion, and civil rights protection. Riverside Elementary implemented new policies requiring multiple administrative approvals before law enforcement could be called regarding student behavior, with special protections for students with documented disabilities. The police department revised their protocols for responding to reports involving individuals with developmental disabilities, mandating that specially trained officers respond to such calls whenever possible. Karen Whitfield's legal troubles mounted as additional evidence of her discriminatory behavior came to light. Neighbors provided documented examples of her harassment of other families with disabled members, creating a pattern that supported more serious charges. Her husband, David, filed for divorce and publicly distanced himself from her actions, describing them as morally reprehensible and contrary to the values he thought they shared. The civil lawsuit filed by Maria Rodriguez against Karen Whitfield and the city resulted in a substantial settlement that funded disability advocacy programs and educational initiatives. More importantly, it established legal precedents for holding individuals accountable when they deliberately misuse emergency services to target vulnerable populations. 6 months after the incident, Tommy Rodriguez returned to his normal routine of after-school playground activities, surrounded by friends who had never wavered in their support and protection. His trauma from the handcuffing had been addressed through counseling and community support, and while the memory remained, it no longer dominated his daily experience. The playground where his innocence had been assaulted became a symbol of resilience and community solidarity. A memorial garden was planted near the swing set where Tommy had been playing tag, with a plaque reading, "In honor of all children whose differences make our community stronger, may we always choose understanding over fear, inclusion over exclusion, and love over prejudice." Tommy's story became part of Riverside Elementary's curriculum, taught as an example of how ordinary people can stand up against injustice and create positive change. Students learned about disability rights, the importance of speaking up for friends, and the power of community action to address systemic problems. The incident's aftermath demonstrated that while individual prejudice can cause tremendous harm, collective moral courage can create lasting positive change. Tommy Rodriguez, the gentle boy with Down syndrome, whose only crime was playing tag with his friends, became an unwitting catalyst for a more inclusive and just community, proving that even the most vulnerable among us can inspire others to be better than they thought possible. Today, when Tommy plays on the Riverside Elementary playground, he is surrounded not just by friends, but by a community that has learned to see his differences as gifts rather than threats. His laughter still echoes across the schoolyard. But now, it carries with it the promise that no child will ever again face the injustice he endured simply for being different. In protecting Tommy, his community discovered its own capacity for justice, compassion, and the moral courage to stand against prejudice wherever it appears.